welcome. Thank you for joining us today. If you have any reason to drop out, maybe technically, or any loading, as we know, please don't hesitate to jump right back in. We're not going to block anyone from today's session. This is called the Next Gen Leadership, Enhancing Leadership and Communication in Virtual Teams webinar. We very much wanted to have a discussion about the concept. And as I mentioned in a lot of our marketing promotions, this is not just about working remotely. This is about managing virtual teams. How do we operate in the offices today? A lot of us are conducting most of our meetings, our projects, our executions online. And sometimes the question is, are we doing it effectively? And are we as leaders managing our teams effectively in remote settings? And I do think this is a very important discussion and topic to address. So I think let's jump right into it. I'm going to introduce our presenters first. So we're gonna go around the table. So each of our presenters, I'd like you to just introduce yourself, your background, and just maybe your specific area of expertise, and we'll go through each of you. So I think we could start, Tarryn, with you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tarryn Naidoo. I am currently a human capital executive and head of group services in Forbes. Part of my background is a large extent in the financial services, investments, retail, and legal sector. My disciplines are human capital, commercial partnering. I'm specializing as well in leading the Ways of Work project at Forbes. And as we transition into the journey of moving into the future, and the future is now, part of my strategic capabilities lead to that center of excellence. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Akiva, if you could introduce yourself as well.
Sure. So Akiva Bibi. So I've been sort of in corporate venturing and working with big corporates and growing fast tech startups, etc., across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So over the time, sort of launched about 4 ventures. My speciality has really been around enterprise-wide digital transformation. And then when it comes to corporate venturing, the kind of key area there is sort of enabling big, large, established, oversized corporates, leverage the new digital disruptors just to really defend their core business and grow into adjacent businesses. And then over the years, I've been sort of involved, had the privilege of working with sort of Google, PayPal, Salesforce, and some other kind of interesting trailblazers, just to really help them with what I like to call the unnatural act of leadership. and really they're also working with a few very fast-growing African companies, helping them also understand how to build virtual digital teams. I am a keynote speaker on innovation growth, co-hosted a podcast on disruption, and also my kind of speciality was MSc in innovation and technology, and did my innovation growth program. I finished with INSEAD, and that's me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Nicola, over to you.
Good afternoon. Thanks very much. Nikki Tager from Investec. At the moment, I look after 3 things at Investec for the group. Wellbeing is a key focus of ours. I've taken on that project over the last year, looking after the Investec experience, or employee experience as people would term it. And I look after careers globally for Investec, which really is the talent acquisition part of the business. Been around at Investec for 17 years. I am an HR consultant by profession. So worked previously to Investec in an HR consulting profession. Very passionate about leadership. Most of my own upskilling has been around leadership coaching. Had the privilege of being at Harvard not so long ago. So yes, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much. Sean.
Oh, hi, my name's Sean Culey. I'm currently the head of value chain at something called the Manufacturing Technology Centre, which is the UK's sort of hub of innovation, doing the projects that others cannot or will not be able to do. Some things, everything from sort of nuclear fusion to the new future of transportation, those sorts of things. I'm also visiting fellow at Cranfield University, where I focus on supply chain and disruptive technologies. I guess most people probably know me either through my keynote speaking or my writing. I'm the author of a book called Transition Point: From Steyn to Singularity. And I guess I spent most of my career sort of helping companies to transform in these sort of disruptive times. And what I call now sort of teaching them to become anti-fragile. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Chantelle.
Thanks, Karlien. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chantelle Lottering. I currently work at Nedbank. I look after strategic workforce planning, job architecture, and organization design for the organization. Have a strong background in the financial services industry and also specialize in talent management, leadership development, and organization effectiveness. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Should I say I'm leaving the best for last, Johan? Johan, Steyn, over to you.
No pressure, Karlien. Thank you, everyone. I focus on artificial intelligence. I think over the last 9 years or so, some of it is actual consulting around AI strategies. I do some work in the academic space. I've done quite a bit with CTU, Karlien and her team, executive education. It's a greatly misunderstood technology, and the conversations are mostly run by the techies, where my focus is on the human impact. What will it do to humans, to human teams, to where will education go, and so forth. So I've actually kind of found a bit of a niche there because I'm not technical. It serves me very well. I always say I'm dumb enough to have to figure out the real business application of this tech. And also just early on in my journey, one of the people who helped me most in shaping my thinking, and the book that was great is Sean. I love this book, and I'm so super glad that he's also here. But yeah, Karlien and everyone, thank you. I look forward to this conversation.
Absolutely, and we've definitely got some powerhouses in this specific field to talk about this, and I'm personally quite excited about this conversation, and I'm sure our audiences as well as the audience who's going to listen to it afterwards. For those who have joined in, we will be sharing the recording once we've had time to set up the communication channel, but the recording will be available after today. All right, well, let's get started with our conversation. And we're going to go through kind of like a question basis, typical questions that people do ask and what we can explore as a team. And the first question, I think, is specifically ideal for Nikki, Sean, and Tarryn. And obviously, I think Tarryn, we can maybe start with you and then take the conversation from there. So the first one we can focus on is, what are the key challenges that leaders face when they manage virtual teams, and how can some of these hurdles be effectively addressed? So the main topic here is the key challenges for managing virtual teams.
Okay. So, Karlien, thank you very much. So what we found, and I'm speaking purely from experience in dealing with a variety of clients, particularly as we navigate this world, is a major challenge is that of communication and actively communicating in this new world of work. So we come out from an environment traditionally being in office where you are seen to be working, your recognition, your reward, your promotion, your collaboration is all in-person based. Having to transition into the new world of work, you quickly have to adapt your communication strategies and your reward strategies as to exactly how do you recognize people? How do you talk? You no longer have the luxury to just walk into somebody's office, call a quick powwow, have a stand-up session in the morning. Now you have to take things into consideration like, what are the different time zones that people are actively working in? How do you structure the work-life balance that happens? Not everyone has set or fixed working hours. How do we build team cohesion? It's not like I simply can take Nicola out for a cup of coffee in office and build a relationship with her. What are the new ways in which we now can have a virtual coffee, and transitioning from this consistent need to be in person all the time and actively now transitioning into a virtual world of work? We actively have built about actual communication guidelines and toolkits to actively navigate the world of work, to teach people how to transition from in-office engagements over into the virtual world, and how these can actively be as effective, if not more, in the world of work that we find ourselves in now.
Absolutely. Maybe, Nikki, we can go over to you.
Sure, thanks. So I'm going to try not to repeat. I'm just going to add other potential ideas. So I think we're also battling with things like speed of execution when we're virtual and we're not in person with one another. What we also hear from people is around innovation. Innovation is very hard when you're not with people with diversity of thought, bringing through ideas, etc. So you really have to use technology cleverly to make thinking space together. And things like upskilling, integration that we maybe took for granted when you bring in a new person into the organization, it's far easier when you're sitting next to one another in order to upskill quickly and get people up and running. And so I'm going to say something really, really blasé and probably what people would think is too simplistic. But I think you have to find leaders that are incredibly relational and incredibly human-centric, because what your leader is going to have to drive in a virtual world is the thing that's going to create cohesion is a really strong culture. So you're going to have to create culture in a way that's not natural to all of us through this virtual world. But I think you're going to have, as I say, leaders that are very intrigued with the human relationship. And they've got to take it outside of the virtual tool to be able to connect with people on work and really bring it into individual relationships with people. Because I think that's where you're going to build trust. You're going to get a sense of the individual, and therefore you'll get the best of them in this virtual team. But really, leaders are going to have to focus a lot on that. I think that's one of the primary tasks, apart from holding strategy and that kind of stuff. It's really to build culture and to build relationship here.
Very, very strong point. Sean, anything from your side regarding challenges that leaders face in managing virtual teams?
Yeah, I think you know, I'm a leader. I have a team that's quite large, and I think, you know, there are a number of different challenges with people online, and, you know, I think if you're not visible, it's hard to sometimes to be noticed, when specifically when you're thinking about the team that you have. The ones that you defer to are the ones who are in front of you every day versus the ones that are remote. So I think there is an issue there, and one of the things that certainly I insisted almost immediately was that when people, you know, noticed when people were having Teams calls, you know, you would see their circle with their initials in it. You wouldn't see their face. So, you know, get the cameras on. We had to be, because we're had 100,000 years of evolution being able to read people's faces in order to understand the emotions that are going through that. You take the camera off, and suddenly you lose a huge amount of the communication that we've just been talking about. So I think that's a big thing. You know, there is a lot of corridor conversation, water cooler moments that you miss out on. You know, going to grab a coffee together and actually talking about that. I think one of the challenges with remote work is that you lose sight of the human, and they become the resource. So that you don't actually have that human to human interaction that you would normally have to do. You don't ask. You start a Teams call, you have the meeting, you end the Teams call or the Zoom call or whatever. You don't talk about the kids. You don't talk about the wife. You don't talk about what you did last night, what you watched last night. It goes straight into a very formal kind of structure, and that can be a bit dehumanizing, you know. And I think there was a comment made say that, you know, got to adopt to a culture that's not natural. And I think that's the wrong way around, because we're letting technology lead there. We actually have to get technology to adapt to a culture that is natural for us, because we can't unpick, you know, 10,000 years of how to socially interact with each other just because we have a new form of web communication. It has to work with us, not against us. And I think that's one of the big challenges as well. So and the other thing I think is that, you know, certainly when we have remote teams, we tend to set up meetings remotely, and the meeting fills and expands the time. But actually, in a lot of cases, people are online but not present. They're also doing their emails, or also check. You know, you can see where their eyes are darting around, where you're thinking, you're not talking to me. You're actually doing something else at this particular moment in time. Whereas if they were right in front of you, you'd see the fact they got the phone out, or they're doing something, but you can't see that. So I think these are some of the challenges, and they all mean that you can have a team, but that team doesn't necessarily operate in the team that we traditionally know as like a tight-knit unit. They're just names on an organizational chart, and they're definitely some of the challenges I feel we have to try and overcome.
Definitely, and I think for those who spoke, a lot of the challenges were pointed out, and I think all of us experience, and I'm sure our attendees as well, amongst others, that they still are, and I'm sure we're going to get to all of them as the conversation goes. So I think the next topic we can look at, and Akiba, I think I'm going to start with you here, is in your experience, what specific leadership qualities, and I think Nikki referred to one of these as well, but what specific leadership qualities are crucial for effectively leading remote teams? And when I say remote teams, I want to address this to the audience. This is not just about teams working remotely. Everyone works from home. This is, if you are conducting meetings online constantly or managing projects, that's still remote work. So yeah, over to you, Akiba.
Great. So it's always a tricky one, right? Because whenever you ask someone what they wrote in their thesis, you're going to get like a 10-hour conversation. So I'm going to kind of narrow in. So when we're doing our research, and this was with a whole lot of folks also overseas as well, the kind of key question was actually this. It was 2018, so we're still kind of asking not as radical questions, but it was like, what happens when radical change becomes the new norm? So kind of to your point, Karlien. I think what's important is people often think virtual teams. It's really kind of systemic of what really happened post-COVID, and that we've been super interested in. So when we were studying at the time, what we're all looking at is what happens when you have, what Sean spoke about earlier, that sort of that anti-fragile moment, like a black swan moment, where pandemic happens. At the time, we were thinking about digital pandemics, not necessarily physical pandemics, but the moment something happens which really disrupts every single one of us, that's really, I guess, going back to the question, like what's changed in leadership. So I think one's always got to understand what's the fundamental core problem. And the key problem that happened was with a radical change and a black swan like COVID, what it did, it brought digital transformation and all these things that all us in the corporate sector were trying to get going. It created zero tolerance for waiting. So what happened was speed to change became crucial. So at that time, when we were looking at something called anti-fragile organizations. So what happens to organizations when suddenly a radical change happens? Who are the ones who can respond quickly, and who are the ones who just are not able to respond quickly and hence lose market share, they lose market growth, they respond ineffectively, etc. And like Nicola, what she said as well, I thought was great, is just the relationship element was interesting. So what we found is, funny enough, and again, this is not it's a stereotypical statement, but what we found is we're comparing what we call traditional male leadership versus traditional female leadership. And what really came out is when you have a digital era like we're in today, where virtual and all different types of tools are changing so rapidly, what we found, fascinatingly enough, was the classic, call it the male approach of sort of top down, the hero, I'm here to save the day, really worked in the negative. And the anti-fragile organizations, those folks out there who are able to respond quickly, move fast, and actually, turn a negative situation into a positive market growth opportunity, which we've seen, by the way. And I'm sure a number of you have examples of many big corporates who leveraged COVID and all the negative that came out of it to create better market share. What we saw was this feminine leadership. It was the leadership capability of really engaging people much better. So like we were working with a big American insurer, and the particular leader, she was incredible at just tuning in to her team and using digital tools. So the ability to understand what digital tools to use, and then also the ability to know how to communicate better and more effectively, we saw as a massive one. So suddenly in digital and you're being overwhelmed with tons and tons of stuff. So how do you do what we call radical prioritization? So you've got like 500 things to get through. How do you prioritize the top 3 and win? Because we found big corporates, they had more noise was coming in because suddenly they were partnering with digital disruptors. They're doing a whole lot of new initiatives. And then what happened is they had this incredible list of prioritization list, and it was causing them to underperform the market. So leaders had to think about, like, what does radical prioritization mean to us? Like, how do we radically prioritize? And what was interesting from a leadership point of view, going back to Nicole, what you were saying, sorry, Nicola, was just that ability of being able to relate to the various business units. So instead of saying, this is what we're doing, rather engage the business units, engage the customers, understand where the market's at, and then quickly pivot and adapt. So those are sort of key things. And just one last closing thing was also what we saw from COVID was the incredible isolation that happened as well. So what we found was, because there's all the talk around burnout, etc. And again, all of that was a matter of too much noise and too much digital. So some of the practices that we're kind of working with lots of corporates to do is, how do you create these sort of Chinese walls, essentially? So how do you create that ability to have space to be yourself, and then also step in, because there's incredible transparency. Suddenly you're sitting in the CEO's living room or lounge, whatever it is. We never had that before. So there was a strong personal element, but then there's also a point where people were feeling, from an isolation point of view, they're just feeling overwhelmed and burning out. So part of that was also radical prioritization, what to prioritize, and then how to work more effectively and get into different rhythms. So we've seen the companies that are doing well in this, the leaders are bringing a different rhythm and how, in terms of like Sean, what you're speaking about, like bumping into people in the water cooler, like how do you start orchestrating that in a semi-natural way? And the last one from digital leadership is we saw the really good digital leaders, they realized that they had to get an outside in view, because a lot of the big corporates, especially financial services, who I work a lot with, they tend to be very inwardly focused, because there's so much regulation and stuff that you got to take care of. Yeah, so you end up having massive blind spots. So we saw that the digital leaders that were really good is they were able to create teams that could get an outward perspective, so they could see what was actually happening in the marketplace. So those are some like really interesting kind of elements I thought I'd highlight.
Absolutely. Chantelle, I'd also like to hear from your side on leadership qualities, especially if you can, maybe we can look at a comparison on how these qualities differ from traditional leadership skills.
Thanks, Karlien. I think Akiva did a great job of explaining or giving an overview of what leadership qualities are crucial for effectively leading remote teams. I think the only thing I'd want to add there potentially is to continue to celebrate successes, right? Because I think it's part of that promoting team processes and staying close to team members that a lot of the panel members have spoken about. But I think it's increasingly also just remembering to celebrate successes, take people on the journey with you, building that trust and shared purpose, not only on an individual one-on-one basis with individual team members, but also getting the team together as a community. And then, like was mentioned, I think it's also important to still continue creating opportunities for exposure and growth for your team members, that coaching, that mentoring, and ensuring that they don't lose out on that, right? Because when you're in the office, I think it's easy to get that because you go with people to meetings and people see you, you get the opportunity to talk. And I think some of that gets lost in remote work. So it's a dedicated effort to, I think, continue to creating those opportunities. Yeah, in terms of some of the things that might have shifted, I think we spoke about communication, right? And really the need to almost over-communicate and ensuring there's regular and consistent communication, that you touch base with your team, you integrate, and that it's not going to be face-to-face. It's going to be using different alternative tools, technology, WhatsApp groups, etc. I think it's about that trust and empowerment. I think when you're working remotely, there's a lot of presumed trust, right? Leaders must, I think, establish that trust and ensure that they don't go back to that earned trust. I think worldview where you're seeing people working and therefore you're assuming they're productive, and in a remote context you don't always see people working, but you see the outcomes, and rather focusing on that and managing that. I think it's about that empathy and emotional intelligence, that human-centered leadership, and the ability, like we said, to use our videos to be able to see those non-verbal cues, body language. Whereas in a remote work context, sometimes it's an active listening and empathy approach, right? You have to actively put in an effort to observe those things because it's not as natural as it would be in a face-to-face setting. And then I think, yeah, embracing that technology and change in a remote leadership context, right? Leaders need to be open to adopting new technologies, new strategies, new ways of working versus the traditional leadership around maintaining stability and routine. And I strongly agree with one of the points that one of the panel members made earlier, I think it was Nicola, around building that relationship with your customers and ensuring. And I think a lot of it currently sits also with managers and leaders to really role model those types of behaviors to help their people to build those relationships with cross-functional teams, especially also onboarding new members of the team. It's important, I think, to stay close to that.
And it really starts from the top. If your leadership team is not adopting or embracing the new norms, it's going to be difficult for the entire company to do it as well. So yeah, that's why this conversation is so important. And that actually leads me to the next topic is, and I think I get this a lot whenever I have conversations with business leaders or business owners on remote work. One of the big, I don't want to call it an excuse, but let's say reasons for them not purely believing in it is the term company culture. They all say the company culture gets lost online. They all believe the company culture cannot be maintained as long as you work remotely. It's a very common concept that's brought up, and I'm not here to debunk it. I think it's obviously that we just talk about it, but And I think we can all, whoever wants to go first on this topic, please, just jump in. But I think we need to talk about best practices and strategies for maintaining strong company culture within a virtual workforce. And again, even if your company is not work from home based, but you're based nationally, you are working virtually with your teams. So, but how do you maintain company culture more effectively since you're not in each other's faces all the time? So yeah, I think in this case, Akiva, Sean and Tarryn, you've mentioned that this is something you'd like to engage on. But again, I'm also opening this to our other panelists. So yeah, I'd like to go first on this one.
I'll break the uncomfortable pause as we all play the Mexican standoff. I think there's truth in that, actually. I think, I don't think you can just say that, debunk it because it's not true.
Yes.
And of course it's true, it's reality, but sometimes those cultures aren't great. So enforcing a culture that actually isn't particularly it could be more toxic is not a good thing. It's got to be the opportunity to potentially create a new culture that might be more constructive moving forwards. And I think but I think there is truth. There's always the truth at the kernel of that says, actually, if your culture is driven by management, by walking around, for example, by being able to go up to people and have a discussion and asking how the day is going, by the executives being visible and these sorts of things, then obviously it has to change if you're going to a remote team. There are also real risks to culture with this approach, because it's very easy to operate in a sort of management style of abandonment. If you can presume people are working because you don't have to see them. You don't see someone who's not obviously actively engaged because their body language is presenting a fact that they're not engaged. Whereas they're on the end of a screen, obviously you don't get to see that. So I think there is truths in that. It is harder to maintain that culture, but also it gives you that opportunity to rethink what your culture should be in this new mixed environment. So and that's the real opportunity, I think, that says, there are huge benefits to remote working. You can engage people in different geographical spaces. You can remove the non-value-added commute, which I know in Joburg and places like that can be quite a thing on the various days, as it can anywhere else. And you can repurpose that time into more value-added stuff. And you can give people, that home-life balance that we've been talking about for the last century or so. The opportunity really, I think, is to think what your culture should be moving forwards, and how do we operate in a world with hybrid working versus how do we protect the way things necessarily used to be done.
Tarryn, maybe
100%. Sorry, Karlien, I just want to jump in there. 100% agree with Sean. I think it's an opportunity, given the shift that we've made, and we can't deny the shifts that have happened. And, it's radical shift. We didn't have the luxury of slow changes. The shift in the workforce, the shift in the world of work, the shift in the culture also similarly needs to happen. And I know for us, it was definitely an opportunity to leverage of some of the cultural practices that Akiva spoke about earlier. We have certainly shifted from a results-only culture. We were focused on results, learning, and caring 3 years ago. Now caring has taken the forefront in terms of how we actively manage the culture in our business. We deliberate about this online culture that resonates with the culture of care, of empathy, of concern with our staff members. In this world of work, leaders are actively mandated to actively build, the culture of care that sits across the online platform and integrate it. So, actively hosting these social spaces for where you actively check in with your people, where you have social cohesion spaces, where there's virtual networking opportunities. I know earlier one of the speakers spoke about, now you have yourself, your family, the cat, the dog, even the bird on the call. We've used it as an opportunity to engage more and create a closer bond with the workforce that we're working in. So it's almost like we've brought the family along to work as well, so that we actively know, and we make it a point out of every leader's mandate to check in with people on a holistic sense, not just the employee that you expect to deliver results, but holistically what's happening in the environment. given the fact that we have transitioned into people's homes, people's families, people's lives. And I know we speak about home life balance or work-life balance, but we seem to also erode those boundaries to a large extent. And for us, the world of flexibility has allowed for us to say we are outcomes focused, like Chantelle mentioned earlier. So how you arrange your day and your teams is flexible for what makes sense for the team. So there's no blanket mandate to say this is your fixed hours. We allow teams to self-manage, to self-regulate, and there's a high degree of trust that we have to place into our managers and the teams to realize that we're not going to police everyone around. We trust that you know what needs to be done. If you don't, you're going to ask for assistance or reach out to any member of the network, because we have a very large and multiple online networks that you could reach out for assistance for, and you leverage off that. We are interested in you as a whole self, not just outcomes only. But what we've seen is a greater productivity level, more sacrifices, and emotional engagement with the business. There's very positive outcomes from an employee engagement overall score. Like Nikki tests within their environment as well, we test the employee experience, which is inclusive of how do you feel the culture in our organization. And we welcome that feedback as well.
Fantastic. Atiba, anything from your side on this matter?
Yeah, no, so I mean, I think it was great. I think Tarryn and Sean, kind of what you covered, and just kind of building on that, those radical shifts. So I mean, just to maybe give an example. So one of the teams we're working with is very fast growing tech company based in Africa. Interesting enough, it was actually set up in the US, but then they became sort of African centric. And what was really interesting there was watching this team, and they were built as a tech first company and virtual from the beginning. So that you had these teams working across Africa. But what was like super interesting there is a few things. Firstly, you had all the dynamics we're finding now in obviously in the big corporates, where you've got people dispersed over multiple geographies. You've got very diverse cultures as well. And suddenly you're trying to get people to all work on the same project. So some of the things that we picked up there in terms of like where to start, because you're asking like, what are those strategic, called best practice, actual tools, and what will actually work. So what we found works really well is, number one is just kind of the starting place, which was interesting, was the CEO and his senior exec team. They're all a very young team as well. They're sort of in their like early 30s, which was like very interesting as well. And a lot of this was not in their comfort zone. So they were not familiar in leading. They were very fun leaders. So number one is, number one question was, are you a functional leader, or have you had that relational skill of like leading diverse teams? Understanding is not only about results. And really interesting enough, we found working with engineers, their default obviously is results, right? Mm-hmm. So the idea of connecting to each other was like a very strange concept, so we had to make sure that was packaged in a way that spoke to them, whereby actually by connecting better, there was better alignment. So they had to all have the same vision. We had to work out how to do radical prioritization, what projects you're working on and who's working on it and where they're working on it, what time zones you're working on it, when you're working on it, and then making sure that it comes together correctly, so you don't get people overlapping or running ahead or running to the side, etc. So what we kind of saw, and we had to show the team, is had to set up, for example, good practices are like team coaching. So having a team coach who can check in with them and really be a mirror to kind of go to them, go, guys, like you really messed up there, or your OKRs, your objective key results are just ain't happening, and like why? And then often help them escalate it. Like we often found a lot of senior IT, folks that we work with, they often didn't know how to communicate it up a level, right? So they'd often come to, as part of the radical prioritization, they'd come to the CEO and C-suite, and they'd show them like reams of data. And the executive's sitting there going, okay, so what's the bottom line? And then it's been like another half an hour telling them. And CEO's like, okay, but what's the bottom line, right? So having to kind of, coach them to have the language and capability to communicate effectively across the different, call it, cultural expanses, but also different ways of how they lead, like functional leaders versus, leaders who can lead others and lead teams, etc. And then maybe just the last one was what we found is this massive trend in South Africa. It's slowly taking off, but we definitely saw it overseas, of what we saw, the trend towards what they call corporate venturing. So as a practice, so what we've seen is a lot of the big corporates now, they've kind of, because of COVID and changes that happened so fast, one of the practices they've taken on is really going, how do we tap in and unlock the corporate enterprise? And the big challenge that corporates have in South Africa as well, we've seen is they can't access the people who can run it, right? Because most people either work in a corporate or they work in fintechs. So to find people who are a hybrid of both worlds, who can speak, fintech language and, fast, rapid result language, and speak corporate mitigation, risk mitigation, etc., and understand how to bring the innovators in. So we've seen that's a massive need and practice that's needed in South Africa, because we've seen that happening around the world in terms of people leveraging top talent and top technology to really help them get that edge. Those are some of the things we're kind of seeing happening quite regularly.
Can I just add one point here around culture before we move off it? Is I think you must also be very specific in designing the structure of your organization in terms of how virtual or hybrid or in person you are, based on the culture. So I absolutely agree with Sean and everyone around, your culture can adapt, but if it's going to adapt to the point that it dilutes to be nothing, it's going to be a concern. So for us, we would speak very much around our culture actually being the competitive advantage, because it is the way in which we deliver. It is what we deliver, etc. So an organization like ours, we would never be able to be fully virtual for parts of the culture that wouldn't exist to us if we were. When you keep speaking about designing new organizations, 100%, you've got the benefit of being able to design not only strategy, but structure, culture, and all of it that's going to be able to support what you're going to deliver. But I think organizations need to be careful around saying, how far will you allow your culture to adapt, which it needs to. A strong culture is an adaptive culture. It is not a stiff culture. That becomes a cult and it will die in corporate organizations. But how far will you allow it to adapt that it becomes unrecognizable and it doesn't deliver the performance that you're looking for it to do so? So I think it's a fine balance around, applying one's minds versus being fully virtual is the way that all organizations are going to operate.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Sorry,
I wanted to add, Nicola, I think what you raise is great, because what we've seen as well is organizations that are intentional about the rethinking of their organizational design are getting a much better edge in the market versus those who are sort of they've got the tools and processes in place, but they haven't intentionally changed, like, what is our vision of how we show up, right, in terms of our actual corporate identity, how we make decisions, how we engage people, how regularly we engage, like what Sean said earlier, having the cameras on, off. These are all, we've seen very intentional kind of steps, and we've seen organizations that don't fully understand how to do a proper reorg in terms of what it means in this market. It doesn't deliver the best results.
Well, absolutely. And again, I think that's why this topic was so important, because it is something that's always brought up, and it's great to see the different angles that was discussed here as well. The next point we're going to look at is communication. And Tarryn, I'm going to start here with you. Is communication is obviously a pivotal part of effective virtual environments. And maybe we can unpack some communication strategies or tools that you could recommend to ensure effective and efficient communication. And again, if any of our panelists want to add on to what Tarryn is saying, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, so Karlien, we were very deliberate in educating our workforce on what is communication and how do you communicate during this virtual world of work or virtual environment. It was reckless to just assume that people naturally will adapt and adopt the virtual world of work, which is why we started off with actively educating the workforce, offering toolkits, communication sessions, teaching people how to use virtual tools. We use quite extensively the Microsoft Teams platform, the Viva Engage platform. So we've brought in a large volume of that package across the business. And part of what we also insist, similar to what Sean was talking about, is we've set certain guidelines around how do we engage, how do we communicate. And we can never over communicate in our business because different people receive the messaging in different forums, formats, etc. So what we've committed to is regular virtual meetings, every single team must meet at least once a month to engage across virtual platforms so that everyone's on the same page. You discussing your key agenda items with the different stakeholders, and you are actively encouraging collaboration and this cohesion during this virtual work environment. Part of what we also do is we engage across virtual social spaces. So we've used the Yammer platform or Viva Engage quite extensively to build that cohesion outside of strict business practices. So when we post things socially, be it your personal stuff, if we run campaigns around Valentine's Day with your pets, show us your Christmas photos. What's your holiday persona? Those things are leveraged off the virtual platforms in our business. And what we found is, to create more positivity and intent and attract adoption, is we deliberate about rewarding and recognizing across the virtual platforms. So a lot of our recognition, our reward platforms, actively announcing top employer announcements, for example, take place across those virtual platforms. And actively, with every single employee that comes into our business, we, as part of our onboarding induction programs, make it known that these are the channels by which we communicate. This is how we engage. We offer ongoing training programs, particularly as we adopt new tools in the world of work. So there is active engagement to firstly educate people, to get them comfortable with knowing how to use the tools, and thereafter actively promoting the adoption via various channels across the environment.
Fantastic. Would anyone like to add to this? Okay, we can definitely go on to the next point, which is very similar to communication. This is now engagement. So we did touch on engagement a few times, but I think we can make it a condensed discussion. Nicola, I'd like to start with you here. Again, employee engagement is also crucial for productivity and satisfaction, which we did talk about as well. What initiatives or approaches have you found to be effective in boosting engagement and motivation in remote teams that you work with? And again, even not working remotely, but engaging in online projects or teams.
So again, I think it's got to do a lot with leadership and culture. I'll speak to this, unfortunately, most of the time, to be quite honest. But I think it is around creating a participation culture where people feel that they've got, input, so that they can engage, that they can challenge the status quo. I think it is around not necessarily, listing someone's 10 tasks that they need to do and keep them in those parameters. But it really is around creating an entrepreneurial type culture where people can come in and give input and challenge, as I say. And I think that there are two concepts here that people have to speak to as well around trust. Trust is a very big thing when managing hybrid or virtual teams. As we know, people have spoken to it earlier. If you can create trust, what it gives people is a freedom to operate and an autonomy to get the work done in the best way that they think is possible. And I think that's what people are looking for in life. I think it is around purpose-driven organizations that are going to connect with me as a human being, that are going to take care of with me around things like my well-being, that leaders are going to lead with things like empathy, with a very human-centric approach. The more we move into this world of advanced technology, which Kiva is far more attuned to than I am, I think what we are looking for as human beings is the total opposite from the organization, to be able to support both of the best of these worlds, So I think engagement truly is going to be, again, around this relational capability where you can really pull people in. I think that if they feel valued, to Tarryn's point, if they feel that they are acknowledged in terms of when they are doing great stuff, but I really believe it's purely based on a relational capability here and pulling people very close and creating this culture where they truly can bring themselves into it.
Absolutely. Chantelle, perhaps an add-on from your side.
I agree with what Nicola said, Karlien. I think it's a lot about the culture, the relationships that you build, and that dedicated focus on doing so, right? For us, it's also about inclusion and ensuring that everybody has a voice. And sometimes as a leader, it's about calling on everybody. Sometimes people are more quiet and you need to pull it out of them. But I think it's giving people that opportunity and that exposure. I think just one of the tools we've used to create engagement, and that's worked really well for us, is the leadership playbook that we developed when we initiated hybrid work at Nedbank. So we use this canvas and this playbook that focuses on the why and the how of leading and working together as a team in a hybrid work. And then as part of that, the team has a conversation around what we call a team canvas. And that canvas really just is a tool that leaders can use and you can use it across, hybrid ways of working, remote working, in any way that your team is set up. But it's really used to help the team just to set a common understanding and alignment, great alignment around how are we going to work? What are we going to do? How often are we going to meet? What do we need to produce our best outcomes and our best work as a team? How will we collaborate with each other and with our stakeholders? How will we cover our well-being and our productivity? And what are some of the rules that we're going to implement around that and the behaviors that the team wants to abide by? And then what are the rituals the team wants to create to help us, just celebrate ourselves as a team and connect as a team and as individuals. So yeah, that was, I think, something that really helped us in terms of just ensuring that there's engagement and driving that purposefully.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to add one thing to what you said there. It's really around this relationship of reciprocity. What you're going to give is what you're going to get, to be quite honest. I mean, it's all unconscious to us in organizations, apart from a salary versus a job that you're contracted to do. But this feeling of engagement truly is around this relationship of reciprocity. And if you can articulate for people what the organization does do, even on the softer issues, it heightens the expectation of what the organization is giving. It'll heighten the expectation of the way that people will relate psychologically to your organization, which is then the truest form of engagement. And the last thing that I wanted to say on newer generations, we are noticing that newer generations are wanting purposeful organizations. So not an organization just with a purpose, which is your North Star, but really purposeful organizations that they're going to connect to something similar here. And again, that collectively will create this engagement that we're looking for.
I love that.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that our canvas does is it actually speaks to that. So, right, so how does your individual purpose link to the purpose of what we need to deliver as a team, but also what the organization needs to deliver? And I think our leaders play a great part in facilitating that conversation and also sometimes helping people see that connection where it might not always be directly visible.
So,
Wonderful.
So just to add also, just what you're saying has triggered something as well, just the thing around trust and engagement and sort of, I guess, building that mature, what we'd like to call it, sort of relationship with employees. Great book worth reading is the Netflix story. It's called No Rules Rules. So one organization we're in, we actually put those rules in place. And essentially what it does, it takes the assumption that your teams are mature adults, right? And you just kind of think that's obvious, right? But it's not necessarily. So you treat them like adults. And obviously, if they break that trust, there are very serious consequences which happen very quickly. But just some of the key things that we saw came out of that was just the thing around sort of what we often call radical candor, just the ability to give, and that really comes from more mature leaders who can give, radical feedback in a way that people can hear it. And then leading with context, which is what we've seen very much what both Chantelle and Nicola were saying around purpose. When the staff continuously understand what they're doing, how it aligns to the strategic drivers of the business and why that is a strategic driver, we've seen it definitely creates much more exertion from the staff. They throw much more themselves in it if they feel they're accomplishing not just a sort of a tick list, but something which contributes to a much bigger picture. And really, from all of that, we kind of saw, the micromanaging way of working just really works against you in a very fragmented digital environment. How do you bring people together? You really need a lot of responsible people to come together because you can't watch them at 24/7. I mean, companies that do that, but it's tricky.
It's very interesting to me what you just addressed, and it's something I saw in my career in the past. Is at some point the company I worked for got a trust box, a canteen. Basically, it's a little box that had snacks in it, and you if you take something, you pay for it, but there's not someone who's checking who's paying. It was called the trust box as well. And I think the moment that it was very clear that this is something that is trust based, and the consequence was if it wasn't handled honestly, the trust box would be taken away. It's not going to be available to you anymore. And it's incredible how that purpose driven outcome worked so well, because people knew that they were going to be trusted with this, and if the trust is broken, it's going to go away. It's almost ironic where if you put rules in place, it's probably going to be broken, and where you don't, it's the other way around. So yeah, it actually made me think of that whole concept. I think we just lost Johan for a second. Johan, are you back?
I'm back. Can you hear me? Sorry,
Okay.
I literally pressed the wrong button. Things that technology can't do, so apologies for that.
That's all right. You are just the AI specialist. Johan, it's actually the next point is I want to address to you is what role does ongoing training and development play in nurturing these leadership skills within virtual teams, and how can organizations implement effective training programs for remote employees? And again, I reiterate this, it's not just about remote employees, it's about employees who operate in remote formats constantly, online meetings, virtual projects, all of that.
Yeah, look, I loved listening to the conversation so far. That's why I haven't said a lot. Different views, very interesting. Maybe just to step back a little bit, we, and perhaps to Sean's point from an evolutionary point of view, who we are as humans and how we have formed to live in tribes, to collaborate, to learn to trust, to learn to mistrust, and so forth. Technology will not change that. When we meet face to face, I without knowing it, I'm reading thousands of micro expressions in your face to determine whether you are a friend or a foe. Even smells like pheromones and hormones, etc., plays a role, body language, and so forth. So you can't Zoom that. Zoom or Teams is hugely beneficial from the point of view of teams from across the world collaborating. But that feeling of, I don't know why, but I feel I can trust you because my brain is doing so many calculations while we're chatting, especially when we meet for the first time. You cannot AI that or Zoom it, etc. But the reality is that for most of us, we will very rarely, if ever, meet most of the people we are working with. When it comes to training, the other thing I wanted to say is some people are bad virtual leaders because they are bad leaders. I think virtual makes it most likely even worse. And I don't know your experience, everyone on the call. I've worked for some horribly bad leaders in my life. And one of the things that I see happen a lot is that, so say you're in a sales team or in a software development team, they often make the best salesperson or software developer the leader of the team, where that person most likely don't have any ambition to lead. They're most likely most comfortable working alone, and they've never had any exposure or mentoring themselves on how to lead. It comes back to me, remember that TV series Undercover Boss, where they would disguise the CEO to go and work with the normal people, say on the factory floor, whatever. And that's when he or she would discover that there's a lot of things happening, or ambitions in people and fears in people that you would, at the executive level, never know. I think when it comes to training people, the training we push down the pipe is often, it's normally, and I've worked like many of you for some of our biggest corporates or auditing firms, etc. Normally it is as boring as anything. And I can't skip the video to the multiple choice until the video is done. So now I go and iron my clothes for long, and then I come back and it's multiple choice, so you wing it and you get it right normally within 1 or 2 tries, but you're not learning. So there's a lot of talk these days about hyper-personalized learning, delivering the same content but maybe in different ways, because maybe I'm more a visual person and you're more an auditory person, etc. But I think sometimes we design training, especially culture that we spoke about and other things, from a place of being so far away from where most of the people that work for our business live and what they fear and what their ambitions are, that's why it doesn't resonate to them. So we definitely can use technology and data in a responsible way in this aspect, but it will not replace actually sitting with people while they're eating. And maybe just to conclude, about 15 years ago, I sent Adrian Gore from Discovery an email saying, I'd love to meet you. And I sent that same email to most of our top business leaders, and the only person who came back to me was Adrian Gore. Okay, although his PA most likely. But then 6 weeks later, I had the opportunity, and as I walked in, he's famous for this. I mean, there's normally like an executive boardroom or a lunch area, but once a week or so, he would actually stand in the queue in the cafeteria, because, sorry if I offend anyone, when you are an exec, there are many what I call bullshit layers between what's really happening on the ground, what you actually hear at the top. It's natural, as how corporates work. But unless you're an undercover boss, unless you sometimes stand in that queue and just hear what people are moaning about, what they're talking about, even the security people, the lowest of the so-called lowest in your business, you will not know what's happening in your business. And I think we should get closer to the ground level of what people do, and based on that, design how we train them and upskill them. You can't AI that.
Absolutely. And I think
something I'd like to add, Karlien, onto what Johan had said, is we've also just seen the emergence of micro-learning and shorter, smaller learning sessions, because you don't want to sit for 5 hours in a chair watching a computer screen doing learning or training, but also just making it available on different devices. Some people want to do it on their cell phone, you know what I mean, when they're in a taxi on the way home. Other people want to sit and do it on their laptop. So I think you mentioned catering for those different preferences, but we've also just seen a lot of that. And for leadership specifically, I think it's also about that experiential learning, right? When you're learning how to be a good leader, you're not going to get it from a digital learning platform, or you need to experience it, you need to go through it. And lots of us had to learn how to manage teams remotely, and we've all made mistakes with it. But I think the great thing is that the progress we've made just shows that I think the experiences would really brought it across the line.
Absolutely.
I want to just echo what Chantelle said. It gives you so much of opportunity, especially with immersion-laced training, simulations from a leadership perspective, scenarios that you could be exposed to. I just believe like such a strength that we could leverage, and that we are currently leveraging on, especially for leaders. You're no longer sitting in a fixed classroom where you are sacrificing 2 or 3 days out. It's a once off. You can never refer back to the content if you require a refresher here. It's, just in time learning for leaders that have a limitation on the time that they have to dedicate to learning these things. And you get, not blanket type approach learning. If you are interested in a particular topic with exactly micro learning, like Chantelle said, you can go into the bits that you actively want to know a bit more about, immerse yourself in that, go through some practice sessions, read up the theory, also have this video type training. It's almost like this TikTok environment. Just get it just in time when you need it, get what you want out of it, and revisit it as required. So it's on demand and fit for purpose when it needs to be.
Absolutely. And I think if is there anyone else who wants to add on to this specific topic of training and development in nurturing leadership skills for the virtual environment? Right. Okay, well, we can then, I am going to go on to our last topic of discussion, but this again is open to all our panelists. I think all of you who have noted your contribution to this specific part, and it basically ends off as the future of work evolves and we see things become more remote. We see things that used to be more traditional getting replaced by technology. AI is coming into the workplace more aggressively than ever before. What predictions or trends do perhaps all of you foresee in the realm of virtual teams, and how can leaders prepare themselves and their teams for these changes? But Johan, maybe we can start with you from an AI side and take it from there.
Yeah, Karlien, the technology will just keep on expanding exponentially. The cost of the technology will go lower, and the ability of the technology will be amazing. I mean, I don't know when we will have holographic meetings one day, or definitely augmented or virtual reality is becoming more and more of a topic. But imagine we bring in, say maybe in 5 or 10 years, a bunch of new starters, and they've literally never in their life had an actual business meeting in person. And they probably, for the first few months of working there, they will never learn that skill, that uniquely human skill to navigate a meeting, to influence, to to speak truth to power. So again, on the one hand, it's quite exciting to see where the technology can go. I mean, even if we touch on something like brain-computer interface technologies, you know, I think that's when the so-called metaverse will potentially become more of a reality, because now I don't need goggles anymore. Imagine my brain signals can just see you virtually. But that's also scary, Orwellian, really. So will we, through technology, lose some of the things that makes us most human? And I think it's already happening. And how do we, and will a human resources team become a technological resources leadership team? So there's, what I just want to latch onto this is there's two types of diversity that we very rarely speak about. And perhaps some of our delegates have never thought of this or heard about it before. The one is what I call technological diversity. And I've not seen one HR team yet that's thinking about it. They most likely are in the companies I'm dealing with, because a lot of the work I do is in the learning and development side of things. So right now you might have 9 humans in a team and you onboard a non-human intelligence. And that could be a digital twin, a chatbot, a chat GPT kind of a large language model agent and so forth. But in the very short future, I think we will actually get to a point where you are 1 or 2 humans in the team and the other 7 or 8 are non-human intelligent agents. In certain aspects, definitely, I think in contact centers, potentially customer-facing kind of areas. But have you ever heard of a HR team onboarding a non-human intelligence? Because we do it with humans. We onboard, we greet each other, we go for a coffee, we get to know you. There's certain training you go through. So I think learning to live in the next 5 or 10 years with agents that are perhaps at that time more intelligent than we are, because I think we're already the second most intelligent beings on Earth. We're no longer the first. We've created our own masters in the future, I think, and I know that's dystopian. But how do I live in an organization where the diversity is technological? And then the second kind of diversity, which we rarely speak about, is neurodiversity. And why I want to touch on that is especially from the AI point of view. Now, neurodiversity talks about autism spectrum disorder, a number of things. I read a book the other day that said we wouldn't have had the computer if it wasn't for autistic people, and that's from the founders of Microsoft, to Steve Jobs, to Elon Musk, to who knows who else, Zuckerberg most likely as well. But we rarely shape work environments in person or virtually or hybrid that is suitable for people on the spectrum, because I mean there's a lot of noise issues there, light, sensory kind of experiences. But what I see in the field of AI is that there's a large proportion of people working in predictive analytics, AI, etc., that are on the spectrum. And a lot of that's being written about at the moment. So I just wanted to maybe leave that there, is we have to consider how technologically diverse we will manage our teams in the future. And there's a definite statistical increase in neurodiversity in the world for various reasons, especially in the technology space. And as HR professionals, corporate trainers, etc., are we getting ready for a workforce, say, where maybe 30% of our people are on the spectrum? I just think it can't just be, even as it is incredibly important, gender diversity, ethnicity diversity, those things are incredibly important. But we can't exclude, in my view, the things I've just mentioned.
Right. Anyone else want to? And again, I think this is something we need to expand to the rest of our panelists. Nicola, anything from your side on, not per se just on the matter of AI, but also on what you foresee for the future as well?
So I do agree with Johan. I'm hoping that we are overswinging one way and some form of balance will come back. I'm hoping, and maybe that's just my profile of person that wants some normality of some stuff in person versus just this purely virtual world, etc. So I think we really are testing the boundary, because COVID obviously did push us there, and we're really understanding what the pace of change is like, what technology can do, the intelligence it can bring organizations, etc. But I think we'll find some form of balance. That's my prediction. But I think certain things of the traditional organization have been disrupted and will never go back, which I think we pretend that we understand, and I'm not sure that we've got our heads totally around it. So, for example, things like organizations have become boundaryless. That's a big concept for HR professionals and leaders of organizations to truly understand, where you say an organization has become boundaryless. Because the way that you would contract talent to your organization, the way that you would elicit skill set would be fundamentally very different than we can see even in our pace of change around the way that we're thinking around workforce capacity or talent, etc. So workforces will fundamentally be blended the whole time, and we're going to have to understand what it means to live in a world where you are managing blended workforces as organizations and getting the best value out of them. I really do like that theme around diversity. I think organizations that are going to compete are going to be ones that compete in diversity of thought. And diversity of thought is going to come from what Johan was speaking about: neurodiversity, race, gender, ethnicity, backgrounds, etc. I don't think you'll see banks competing with chartered accountants in organizations, and that's all. Because I think the pace of change is going to be fundamentally very different from what we can even comprehend at the moment because of technology. And pace of change is going to have to assume that your organization can keep up with that pace of change, which is going to require rapid innovation. And the only way I think you're going to get that is through this diversity of thought, to be quite honest, putting multiple different people in rooms. So I think leadership, to the point that we've been speaking about all along here, is I think leadership is going to be that capability of being able to create belonging, inclusion, and all those wonderful things that elicits diversity out of people. I think leaders are going to be the ones that can connect with this massive form of diversity and somehow bring it together on a common task. So I haven't answered anything very specific, to be quite honest, but I think that's what we're going to work towards, organizations in the future.
I definitely shouldn't say it that way. I think every single topic that has been addressed has answered a question that is definitely on, if not all people's minds, but most. So no, thank you so much. Akiva, from your side.
So yeah, I mean, just echoing what Nicholas said now, I think that the boundaryless, digital economy is definitely already here. Blended talent, etc. We've seen this whole thing around for years. We've chatted about, the gig economy, but practically what we're seeing now is there are more what we call knowledge expert on demand platforms than we've ever seen before. So, for example, as a business, if you have a problem to solve, you want to know what are the latest processes, whatever in generative AI, blockchain, whatever relevant to financial services in this particular African country. The ability now to find experts who can actually help you work through that, and obviously can save you hundreds of millions of dollars, to work through that, is becoming a very much an accepted new norm. The idea of curated networks we're seeing is massive. So in other words, it's a classic one in terms of network economy. Anyone who's in your immediate circle are not the ones who get you the best opportunities. It's the ones who are outside of your first line of circle, in other words, outside of your comfort zone, are the ones not just give you a diverse perspective, but we're seeing give you a much better opportunity. So what we're seeing more and more is leaders being very intentional around how do you actually create what we call curated networks, because you don't just want to meet anyone. You want to intentionally meet folks who already expand your thinking in terms of how this can be applied in the real world. So like what Johan was saying about generative AI, so what we've seen on the ground is that a lot of the big corporates are not necessarily replacing people, but they're using it to augment. So our advice to everyone is get your staff trained up in terms of how to use this in your businesses to make you more effective, optimize processes, et cetera, et cetera. Just the nature of the boundaryless economy is so prevalent today. And we've seen folks who are really embracing it and working out from an organizational design, what Nicholas spoke about earlier, like designing it into the organization to be intentional in how they bring the outside world into their business. We've seen that is an incredible advantage for future-proofing yourself. Yeah.
Absolutely. Sean, anything from your side?
Yeah, I've taken quite a few notes as I listened. I think Johan sort of mentioned about we could be 5 or 10 years away, and then throw I think you threw in at the end there, Johan said, but maybe we're already here about this new work environment, and I think we are already here. I mean, I know I don't look old enough, but I've got 2 kids in their 20s, and they one of which is a games tester for one of the top international games companies, and he's never met anyone he works with. And most of them don't show their faces online. They're a voice on the end of the headset, you know, and they actually have an office that isn't ridiculous distance away, but he goes once a year and meets people, and there's almost an element of fear associated with that, because you're being placed into a social interaction, and that is one of the things that does worry me a little bit. And I think you touched on this, Johan. You know, the sort of the social skills and the isolation. It becomes very comfortable to just live, work out of your bedroom, and then therefore the outside world becomes a place that actually becomes quite scary. And I think if you think about how much time we actually spend at work, one of the big side effects of that time was that, you know, in many cases you develop friendships, you develop, you know, you found your life partner perhaps, but you know, but from work, you were, and that is a side that we have lost or are losing as we move to my hybrid things, because you know, it is harder to build those relationships. I also think there is a cultural element as well. You know, Alvin Toffler, the sci-fi writer, said, you know, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those that can learn, it'll be those that so read and write, it'll be those that can't learn, unlearn, relearn. And there's that unlearning bit that we seem to struggle with constantly. And you know, I'm quite aware that, you know, you tend to defer to things that you're comfortable in, and if you're comfortable in situations in working in an office environment, you defer to that. You know, if you're comfortable in being online, you'll defer to that. You know, you tend to go to where you're most comfortable. But I think there are pros and cons to both. And if I think back from my career, the ones I remember and the ones where I still meet up with people who I work with, even though it was 22, 23 years ago, were the ones where I had the most fun and we felt we were doing the most impact. And it's different. I would say it's different. I don't think it's impossible not to have fun in an online world and a virtual world, but I think it's very different. But it becomes more difficult when your work is predicated around Teams calls with a start and an end, and everyone just sits there as a square on the screen, than it is to actually be able to go for a drink after work, for example, and build relationships outside. So I think there are a lot of social challenges that come with this new way of working. Maybe they're not new, they're better or worse, but different. But I think we've got to adapt to that different. And I think I pick up a point Nicola said earlier. I think because I think a lot, you know, I agreed with a lot of what you said, Nicola, and that doesn't mean I disagree with anything anyone else said. I'm just really picking up on the point that, you know, there was you said something about culture being a competitive advantage, and I think that's absolutely correct. And it's how we develop a culture that actually enables us to deliver our goals in such a way that, you know, you get a synergistic payback, that the end result is bigger than the sum of its parts. And I think that's going to be a really key strategic imperative for companies. You know, Drucker said years ago that, you know, culture eats strategy for breakfast, and he's quite right. You know, so that creating that culture which enables people to personalize their work environment so it works best for them and for the organization is going to be one of the real key opportunities, I think, for the new age.
Sure. All right. Anyone else wants to add on to this last topic? We basically just closed off on forecasting and looking at what leaders need to be prepared for the future. And I think some of the main topics that came up was focusing on company culture, and also, you know, maybe realigning your company culture with the way things are now, and you perhaps still stuck on an old textbook of how you set up your company culture 10 years or maybe even 5 years ago. Diversity, absolutely one of exploring the fact that we not seeing every single employee as the same, you know, kind of profile, but really understanding the differences between not just, you know, profiles, but people, getting to know them on a more personal level, but in, you know, still within the boundaries of the workforce, creating a no rules approach, which is something I'm also personally very curious about. But yeah, anything else that we can unpack before we conclude?
So I want to just share one last thing is highly recommend everyone try this out. Go on to ChatGPT if you've got 4, ideal, and just type in there creating my company culture, and then give the context of what your company is, financial institution, whatever. And I think it's a great exercise, because often what happens is we think we're very unique, and it turns out it's like kind of hits it on the mark, and you're going, oh my God, like I'm sounding like everyone else, right? So, which I guess that's what AI kind of tells you, is to go. Yep. I can give you a generic answer, but if you want the specific, unique nuance that makes you, Nicola or Tarryn or Sean, stick out and stand up as a human being, as an entity, I guess those are the kind of human struggles we need to think through, and we need to be challenged by things like ChatGPT to kind of go, hey, look, most of our thinking can be very superficial, and that means our ability to win in the market becomes less punchy in a way. So, yeah.
I like that. I'm definitely going to give that a go. All right. I think that does conclude our session for today. We normally leave a couple of minutes for answering any loaded questions that we might have received, which in this case we have not. I think this is mostly just, I think a lot was said that a lot of people do think about. And I think some could see this as a topic that could be either controversial, very important, or has been addressed many times before. But I think we should never stop addressing this topic, because it's just going to evolve more and more. Just a thank you from C2 Corporate Trading Solutions side to each of our panelists who's joined us today to just unpack this very important conversation. And we appreciate your time. Thank you for those who've attended. We are definitely sharing the recording. We'll also be showing the article based on the key points of the discussion. And we look forward to seeing you again, hopefully in our next webinars, and also to our panelists. We hope to collaborate with you again in the future. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Karlien. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.